What is that your granddad's coat from World War II? Bet she gets the veteran discount for wearing that thing. One of them said it loud enough to get laughs. She didn't flinch, didn't even turn around. But when a four-star general walked in, stopped, stared, and saluted her, everyone realized they had no idea who she really was. This is the story of a soldier the world was never meant to know. Before we begin, what city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The wind rolled across Fort Arlington with the chill of early December. A low sky pressed down on the mountains nearby, and the bass came to life with practiced rhythm boots striking pavement, distant cadence calls, trucks unloading near the motor pool. Inside the commissary, warmth and fluorescent lights softened the morning. Young families moved through the aisles, kids in tow. Soldiers in uniform picked up breakfast wraps and protein bars. The smell of brewed coffee hung near the front corner, where a few older veterans lingered with paper cups and quiet conversation. Evelyn Harper entered without ceremony. No one turned to look at her, at least not at first. She walked with a slight limp in her right leg, not obvious unless you were paying attention. But what drew glances wasn't the limp. It was the jacket, an old olive drab military coat, sun-faded and threadbare at the elbows. The cuffs were frayed, the zipper teeth dull with age. A faint shape remained above the left breast pocket, a patch, once clearly defined, now only a shadow of stitching and faded color. Evelyn didn't wear the jacket for fashion. She wore it because it still fit her body, and some part of it still fit her memory. She carried herself with quiet purpose, her back straight, steps deliberate, eyes scanning the shelves for the same list she'd memorized months ago: soup, eggs, canned beans, dry rice. Her right hand bore a long, pale scar that disappeared beneath the sleeve. She moved alone. In aisle 4, two young officers in pressed OCP uniforms turned the corner: Lieutenant Carter Blake and Lieutenant Ryan Sloan. Both were in their late 20s, fresh from training, and loud in the way that people get when they think they're invisible. "Man, is that jacket government issue or from a Halloween bin?" Carter murmured. Ryan laughed under his breath. "Bet she gets the veteran discount for wearing that thing." They didn't lower their voices much. They didn't have to. They assumed no one would care, and that Evelyn wouldn't say a word. She didn't. Her fingers hovered over a row of tomato soup cans. She checked the price tags slowly, then chose two and placed them in the red shopping basket she held tight against her hip. Ryan leaned in again. "Think it's real?" Carter shrugged. "Looks like it survived Korea, or she just looted her dad's attic." Evelyn turned the corner, stepping away from them. They didn't follow, but their laughter trailed behind her. She didn't look back. By the dairy section, she reached up for a carton of eggs. The sleeve of her jacket lifted slightly with the motion, revealing more of the scar that ran from her wrist toward her elbow. She winced just a flicker, but then straightened her posture. A passing private gave her a sideways glance. A specialist at the milk cooler noticed her, then noticed the lieutenant still chuckling near the bread aisle. And now whispers began to travel. Evelyn kept moving. Her next stop was the front desk customer services. The woman at the counter, Emily Barnes, was maybe 30. She wore a Fort Arlington polo shirt and a tired expression. Evelyn placed a folder gently on the counter. "I need to update my VA address records," she said quietly. Emily blinked. "I'll need your DD-214 or veteran ID." "Ma'am, I don't have either." Evelyn replied. She unfolded a Department of Defense letter and handed it over. "But I have this." Emily read the first few lines, then paused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. I'm sorry. This says your service was under special classification." Evelyn nodded once. "I'll need to call a supervisor." A few feet away, the lieutenants had finished shopping. They stood near the checkout now, watching. Classic stolen valor routine. Carter whispered, not so quietly this time. Ryan grinned. $10 says she tries to file for disability next. More people began to listen. Not everyone spoke, but heads turned. One woman frowned. Another soldier, a corporal, shook her head slowly. At the counter, Emily returned with her supervisor, an older woman named Sandra, who wore reading glasses and a pinched frown. Sandra reviewed the paperwork for less than 30 seconds. Then she slid it back across the counter. This won't work. We need standard documentation to verify veteran status, DD2 Martyr VA card, or military ID. I was told to come here by the VA office on post, Evelyn said evenly. They won't accept my appeal unless my address is verified through base records. Sandra offered a thin smile. Then I suggest contacting them again. Evelyn didn't argue. She simply picked up the folder and tucked it inside her jacket. As she did, something slipped slightly from the inside pocket, a photograph, folded and fading. She caught it before it fell, but not before Emily saw a glimpse. It showed 5 figures in desert camouflage standing beside an unmarked Black Hawk helicopter. Their faces were blurred by sunglasses, shadows, and dust. No insignias, no names. Evelyn returned the photo to her jacket, then turned to walk toward the checkout. Near Register 3, Walter Price scanned a box of cereal for another customer. A quiet man in his 70s with white hair and square shoulders. He wore a black ball cap stitched with the words U.S. Army Retired. When Evelyn stepped into his line, his eyes flicked to her jacket. He saw the worn threads above her left chest, the ghost of a unit patch no one had seen in years. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once. Subtle, measured. She nodded back. Behind her, Carter and Ryan had stopped smiling. A few more shoppers had noticed the tension. No one said it aloud, but something in the air had changed. Evelyn placed her items gently on the belt: soup, eggs, beans, rice. She counted out the exact bills from a worn leather wallet. No hesitation, no apology. Walter gave her the receipt. Have a good day, ma'am. You too. She said, her voice soft but steady. As she gathered her bag, Evelyn glanced once more at the exit. The air outside was sharp with wind, but she didn't flinch. The doors opened with a hiss, and she stepped through them. Her back was straight, her silence heavy. Behind her, the whispers continued, uncertain now. Not just mocking. Some had started to wonder. Not everyone who walks in silence is lost. Some carry stories too heavy to speak, and one of them had just walked out of Fort Arlington's commissary without looking back. The glass doors of the commissary had barely finished closing behind Evelyn Harper when they opened again. This time, it wasn't another recruit or a retiree picking up groceries. It was a man who didn't just walk into rooms. He entered with presence. 4-star General Jonathan McAllister stepped inside, flanked by 2 aides, both younger, both keeping pace with urgency. He was speaking in a low, firm voice, scanning a folder of deployment logistics. They'd just left a classified meeting at Fort Arlington's headquarters about a shift in overseas strategy. Double-check the deployment estimates, McAllister said. The committee needs real numbers, not padded optimism. Yep, sir. One aide replied, tapping furiously on his tablet. McAllister looked up just for a moment, intending only to take in the space, but his eyes stopped mid-sweep. He froze. Across the store, near the front exit, he saw her. That jacket, that threadbare shadow of a patch above the heart. Most would never have noticed it, but he had worn that same shadow across the sand 22 years ago. He stopped walking. He stopped speaking. The aides went 2 steps further before realizing their commander had halted. Sir, one asked cautiously. General McAllister didn't answer. He took one deliberate step forward. Then, without warning, he snapped to attention. His right hand rose in a crisp, formal salute. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't casual. It was the kind of salute reserved for combat heroes or funerals. Everyone in earshot turned. Cashiers, soldiers, shoppers. Evelyn, already halfway to the door, heard the silence behind her. She turned slowly. Her eyes found his, and in that instant she understood. Her posture straightened. She passed her grocery bag to her left hand and returned the salute, sharp and measured. Captain Harper had just been called forward again. The younger soldiers didn't know what they were seeing, but they knew enough to go still. General McAllister dropped his salute first. His voice was quiet but carried through the stunned hush. Captain Harper, Spectre Group, Operation Redwood Echo. Yet, sir, she answered, steady as stone. The name Redwood Echo sent a ripple through a few of the older veterans nearby. They had heard rumors, nothing official, but every covert whisper in military bars had ended with the same word, Iran. The two lieutenants, Carter Blake and Ryan Sloan, stood motionless by the checkout, their faces drained of color. The silence lingered, until McAllister stepped forward and extended his hand. They shook hands like soldiers who had survived the same ghost. And in truth, they had. I never knew your name, and he said. You were already gone by the time we were pulled out. I've waited 20 years to say thank you. Evelyn gave a slight nod. We weren't supposed to stay long, sir. Just enough to open the corridor. A flash of memory passed between them. A desert night. Radio silence. The extraction window shrinking with every heartbeat. Spectre team, you have 12 minutes. Repeat 12 minutes. 6 operators. 1 shattered comm relay. A sandstorm so thick they couldn't see beyond 20 feet, but they held the line anyway. Only 3 of them had made it out. You covered our escape, McAllister said softly. 32 of us survived because of your team. Only 3 of us came home, Evelyn replied. I'm the last one now. By now, every eye in the commissary had locked onto them. Phones were still in pockets. No one dared raise a camera. Walter Price stood still behind his register. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just squared his shoulders and stood a little taller. McAllister glanced back at his aides. Wait for me outside, he ordered. They nodded and quietly exited, closing the door behind them. Captain, the general said, would you walk with me for a moment? Of course, sir. They moved slowly down the cereal aisle, the crowd instinctively parting for them. They spoke in low tones, but enough could be heard to draw breath from every listener nearby. I always wondered who you were, McAllister said. They buried Redwood Echo so deep I couldn't even request the files. That was the protocol, Evelyn said. Spectre operated under triple blind orders. No names, no ranks, no records. Even the mission logs were coded. I know, he replied, which is why what I'm about to do will rattle more than a few offices. She looked at him curiously. I'm going to call the Pentagon, he said, and I'm going to start the process of partial declassification, at least enough for your medical files to be unlocked and for the VA to stop pretending you don't exist. She didn't react at first, but her eyes softened. They'll resist it, she warned. They always do. I outrank resistance, McAllister said flatly. Evelyn let out a quiet breath. Not a laugh, not relief, just breath. I appreciate it. Sir, you deserve it. Captain, after everything. They reached the coffee station at the back. The same place she'd passed earlier without pause. Now, veterans nearby stepped back, giving her space. One nodded respectfully. Another raised his cup in silent tribute. I remember Major Granger, McAllister said suddenly. He led your team, didn't he? Yes, Evelyn answered. He was the one who stayed behind on the ridge. He held the line so we could carry out the diplomats. His jacket, this one, is all I kept. McAllister placed his hand briefly on the sleeve. Granger was a good man. He died a good soldier, she said simply. The general straightened. I need to get back to command, but I want you to come by my office this afternoon. Bring your paperwork. Bring whatever you've got. I'll assign a team to walk it through the chain. I don't want trouble, sir. You're not getting trouble. Captain, you're getting recognition. Long overdue. She didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. They shook hands again, this time slower. And when she turned to leave, the entire commissary remained still. General McAllister waited until she had stepped outside. Then he pulled out his phone and made the call. Pentagon Secure Line. This is General Jonathan McAllister, Priority Code Sierra 9 Bravo, Initiate Record Request Spectre Group, Redwood Echo, May 2003. Begin process for limited declassification of service-connected injuries. Yes, immediate. He ended the call without ceremony. The ripple had begun. And inside that commissary, no one looked at Evelyn Harper the same way again. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours of General McAllister's call, a classified chain of command buzzed into motion. Secure faxes, encrypted briefings, internal memos marked with red banners and layered clearance codes. At the Department of Defense, a team of legal and intelligence officers was assembled quietly. Their task was unprecedented, but precise, unsealed just enough of Spectre Group's operations to unlock medical verification, without compromising national security. It was a balancing act, but McAllister's name carried weight, and Evelyn Harper's silence carried more. 3 weeks later, Evelyn received a letter. This time, it wasn't a rejection. It was approval final and confirmed. The VA had officially acknowledged her injuries as service-connected, based on classified operations verified through high-level clearance. She read it twice before folding it and tucking it into the same inside pocket as the old photograph. Later that same day, she began physical therapy at the Fort Arlington Medical Annex. The staff there had heard whispers, but they treated her with the quiet, professional respect reserved for true veterans. Her right shoulder resisted at first. Scar tissue long settled into stubborn memory, but Evelyn didn't complain. She worked through the pain. The limp in her leg eased. The stiffness in her joints responded slowly but surely to every session. Word spread quickly, not in headlines, but in the mess halls, in the barracks, in the quiet corners of the officer clubs. They said a woman walked out of the shadows. They said a general saluted her. And for once, the whispers were true. One morning, Evelyn returned to the commissary. This time, her jacket had been professionally cleaned and preserved. The faded patch above her heart had been carefully restored, hand-stitched by a veteran tailor who had done the job for free. And below it now gleamed a Presidential Unit citation pin, issued retroactively to Spectre Group for their actions during Operation Redwood Echo. As she stepped through the glass doors, the air inside shifted, not from sound, but from attention. The same cashier, Walter Price, stood behind Register 3. He gave her a small nod, one veteran to another. "Looks right on you," he said quietly. She nodded. "Feels strange, but earned." That same day, Lieutenants Carter Blake and Ryan Sloan approached her in uniform. Their postures were rigid, their voices steady but low. "Captain Harper," Carter began, "we owe you an apology. Our behavior 3 weeks ago was unprofessional and disrespectful," Ryan added. "There's no excuse. We judged without knowing. We're deeply sorry." Evelyn didn't smile, but her eyes were kind. "We were trained to stay unseen," she said. "To protect the mission, not the credit. You weren't supposed to know." Carter hesitated. "But now we do." She gave a small nod. "Then carry that forward." The moment was simple, but it landed deep. Later that week, Fort Arlington's Public Affairs Office quietly released a feature article through the Department of Defense internal newsletter. The headline read, "Captain E. Harper Quiet Valor from a Vanished Unit." No photos, no details. Just a name, a date, and a quote from General McAllister. "Not every battle leaves visible scars. Not every hero asks to be seen." The story spread through the ranks. Senior staff forwarded it to training divisions. Chaplains printed it for Sunday briefings. Soon after, the Army Officer Leadership Academy added Evelyn's case as a module in their ethics and command judgment course. Not her full story, never that, but the essentials don't assume. Respect even the quietest uniform. And never forget that some sacrifices remain classified. The following month, the Pentagon hosted a closed-door symposium titled The Unnamed Heroes' Integrity in Classified Operations. Only a few were invited. Evelyn was one of them. She sat near the back, unnoticed by most just the way she preferred. But when her name was called, and she stood to speak for 5 quiet minutes, the entire room leaned in. No photos were taken, but her words remain. We did our job so others could come home. That's all. If they came home thinking it was luck or a system that worked, that was by design. We didn't need medals. We needed to know it mattered. After that, requests poured in not from media, but from training bases, from new officers, from field instructors who wanted her to speak, just once, to their cadets. She declined most, but one invitation changed her mind. It came from a group of veterans in South Dakota who had started a grassroots initiative called the Granger Harper Fund. Their mission support veterans with lost or incomplete service records, those who fell through the cracks of military paperwork, and were left fighting bureaucratic ghosts alone. They'd heard her story, and they wanted to name the fund after her and her late commander, Major Thomas Granger. Evelyn agreed, on one condition: her name would appear second. It was Granger who stayed on the ridge that night, she told them. He's the reason I'm standing here. The fund launched quietly, but it didn't stay quiet for long. A national veterans network picked up the cause. Then a congressional staffer read about it in a military leadership memo and flagged it for committee support. Within weeks, the Granger Harper Fund had raised over $400,000. Within months, they'd assisted over 200 veterans struggling with lost documentation, unrecognized missions, and redacted trauma. Every time Evelyn heard of one being approved, she made a note in a small notebook. She didn't write speeches, but she counted victories, and that notebook began to fill. 3 months passed quietly, but change had taken root. On a crisp morning in March, Evelyn Harper returned once more to the commissary at Fort Arlington. The snow had melted, the sun was bright, bouncing off the hoods of parked vehicles and warming the walkway just enough to feel like early spring. She walked a little straighter now. Her limp hadn't disappeared, but it had softened its edge, dulled by physical therapy and renewed strength. She still wore the same jacket, but it was different now. The fabric had been cleaned and pressed. The faded patch above her heart had been restitched by hand, its lines sharp once again. The insignia of Spectre Group clearly defined, and beneath it gleamed the small, polished bar of the Presidential Unit citation. Evelyn didn't wear it for attention. She wore it because it belonged, and because those who had earned it with her no longer could. Inside the commissary, things were as they always were. Voices, movement, the familiar clang of carts against tile floors. But when she entered, something shifted. Not loudly, not obviously, but enough. The cashier, Walter Price, spotted her first and nodded with quiet recognition. Near the canned goods aisle, a familiar voice spoke up. Captain Harper. She turned. Lieutenant Carter Blake stood there, no longer the brash, laughing figure from months ago. His posture was respectful, his expression serious. I just wanted you to know, he said, your case, your story, is now part of our officer development curriculum. They use it to teach judgment, respect, what not to miss. Evelyn looked at him, then gave a small nod. Learning from mistakes, she said gently. That's what makes a real officer. He exhaled. Yes, ma'am. It won't be forgotten. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Later that day, she met with Lieutenant Jenna Whitmore, a rising star in the 103rd Military Intelligence Battalion. The young officer had requested the meeting personally. Her unit had been studying declassified sections of Operation Redwood Echo as part of advanced training in low-visibility extractions. I read the mission notes, Jenna said, wide-eyed but composed. Your team's protocols were years ahead of doctrine. Would you consider speaking to my platoon? Ma'am Evelyn paused. It wasn't pride that stopped her, it was instinct. 20 years of silence is hard to unlearn. But she looked at Jenna and saw something familiar. Focus, respect, a willingness to learn the hard truths. I'll speak, she said, as long as what I share helps them come home. The following week, Evelyn stood in front of a group of young soldiers, most barely old enough to remember the year 2003. She spoke not of heroism, but of planning, of loss, of hard calls made in sand and silence. There are missions you'll never see on your record, she told them, but they'll live in your bones. And if you do it right, the world will move on safely, never knowing what it cost. The room was silent, not out of confusion, but out of reverence. Afterward, Jenna approached with gratitude in her voice. You gave them something we couldn't teach, something that won't fade. Evelyn gave her a simple answer. Just make sure they remember the lessons, not the name. But names would not stay hidden forever. 2 weeks later, Evelyn received a letter from the Department of the Army. They were hosting a ceremony to posthumously award the Silver Star to Specialist Miguel Alvarez, one of the 3 Spectre members who had died during Operation Redwood Echo. His daughter, now 26, had grown up believing her father died in a training accident. She'd never heard the real story. Until now, the letter asked Evelyn to attend, to stand in as both a comrade and a witness. She accepted without hesitation. The ceremony took place in a quiet courtyard behind the Pentagon, closed to the public, but filled with people who mattered. Military brass, policy leaders, a few of Miguel's relatives. Evelyn wore the jacket. She stood beside Miguel's daughter as the citation was read aloud. The details were brief, carefully worded, but enough was said. When they placed the medal into the young woman's hands, she broke down quietly, then turned and hugged Evelyn as if she'd known her all her life. You were there with him, she whispered. You helped bring him home. Evelyn nodded, her voice steady. He was the reason any of us made it. A military photographer captured the moment. The story, sanitized and respectful, appeared days later in Stars and Stripes under the headline, The Woman in the Shadows. A local news station picked it up, to just a short segment about a forgotten unit, a hidden hero, and a daughter who finally got the truth. But it was enough. Within a week, over 200 veterans from across Colorado gathered in Fort Arlington's Memorial Plaza. No stage, no speeches, just candles and names. They lit flames for each member of Spectre Group, known and unknown. Someone had printed a banner that read, Some heroes don't ask to be seen. We see you now. Evelyn didn't attend that night, but she drove past slowly, watching from the road. And the next morning, as she walked out of the building where the ceremony had ended, sunlight caught her jacket just right. The restored Spectre patch glowed faintly against the fabric. The unit citation beneath it gleamed. She paused, letting the warmth hit her face, then looked down, one hand instinctively brushing the old scar on her right wrist. Not to remember the pain, but to remind herself of what had been carried and what still remained. She smiled. It was small, but real, because she now knew something she hadn't always believed: silence does not mean forgotten, and being unseen is not the same as being unworthy. Evelyn Harper turned toward the sun and walked forward, no longer hidden, just steady,